Good evening, and welcome back to another quiet journey through boring history for sleep. Tonight, we begin with a question. Have you ever felt that strange stillness at night, so deep, so silent, that it almost felt alive? The Victorians knew that silence well. In a world before electric light, darkness wasn't just emptiness. It had texture, weight, and emotion. It was a companion they lived with every evening. So tonight, let us wander gently into that quiet world, the Victorian night, where every flicker of a candle mattered, and every shadow told a story. Before we continue, how are you feeling tonight? I hope you're somewhere peaceful, maybe lying down, ready to rest. From which country are you listening, and what time is it where you are? It's always fascinating to think that history connects us across time and space. If you enjoy calm stories like this, please remember to like this video, subscribe, and gently tap the notification bell so you'll be here when our next sleepy history begins. Let's begin softly. Imagine yourself in a small Victorian home, the air quiet after sunset. The last chores of the day are done. Outside, the sky has deepened to a velvety black. Inside, the only light comes from a single candle, its flame swaying with each small breath of air. That tiny glow is not just light, it is comfort, warmth, and a reminder that the most merciful allows light to exist even within darkness. The Victorians lived in a world of shadows. Night was not something you could simply switch away. When the candle burned low, there was no button to press, no steady glow waiting to return. For many, that meant learning to live with the unseen, to listen, to imagine, and to move carefully. It taught patience and awareness, a rhythm of life that modern light often hides from us. Out on the streets, gas lamps stood in lines, their light weak and flickering. They hissed quietly, casting trembling circles onto cobblestone roads. Between those circles lay stretches of complete blackness. People hurried through them, hearts steady but cautious. Every sound, a distant step, a carriage wheel, the wind brushing past an alley, carried meaning in the dark. In the countryside, the night was even deeper. Far from towns, the stars shone brighter, but the earth below was nearly invisible. Those who worked the fields by day now rested, their homes faintly glowing with the warmth of small fires. Without the constant brightness of the modern world, the Victorians experienced night as it truly was, vast, quiet, and humbling. Some feared it, but many also found in it a strange kind of peace. The fear of darkness, for them, wasn't always about danger. It was often about vulnerability. A misplaced step, a forgotten lantern, or a wandering animal could cause harm. People respected the night the way sailors respect the sea, not because it is evil, but because it is powerful. And that quiet respect shaped how they lived, prayed, and rested. Inside Victorian homes, families would gather near the fire as the last embers glowed. Mothers mended clothes, fathers read newspapers, children listened to the faint ticking of the clock. The rhythm of the fire, the whisper of the wind outside, all became part of their nightly prayer of gratitude. Darkness was not a curse. It was simply another part of creation, made by the Almighty to remind humankind of stillness and reflection. Writers of the time often spoke about the night with a mix of awe and caution. They wrote of how the mind could wander when the world turned quiet. In the absence of light, thoughts became louder, hopes, worries, memories, all returning for gentle reflection. Many found this moment of solitude to be a time of honesty, where the soul faced itself in calm silence. The candle's flame became more than a tool. It was a symbol. It reminded people that the giver of light could bring clarity even to the darkest hour. A single small glow could chase away vast shadows, not by its power alone, but because the Creator allows such beauty to exist in simplicity. That truth gave people comfort when fear tried to whisper otherwise. And so, as the night deepened, the Victorians learned that darkness was not something to defeat, but something to understand. It was the quiet half of life's rhythm, the place where work ended and peace began. They did not worship light, nor did they curse the dark. They simply lived between them, trusting that every sunset was followed by another dawn, written by the will of the one who controls all time. As night covered the land, the streets slowly emptied. The sound of footsteps faded, doors were bolted, and curtains were drawn. Inside, the fire's glow became softer, until the room was filled with gentle shadows. This was the moment the Victorians called the hush of the house, when even the walls seemed to listen. It was a time of rest, but also a time of thought, where quiet became a companion. In those still hours, some would hear the ticking of clocks echoing through rooms, a steady reminder that time never truly sleeps. Others might look toward the window and see only their own reflection, faint and wavering in the glass. It was a simple yet powerful feeling, being alone with one's thoughts, aware of how small the human world is under the vast night sky created by the Almighty. The fear of the dark was not just a superstition, it was a mirror of human nature. When light fades, the mind looks inward, and in that inward space, one can find both unease and calm. The Victorians learned to balance these feelings. They found comfort in prayer, in quiet words spoken softly before bed, trusting that protection and peace come only from the most merciful. For children, bedtime could feel mysterious. Parents would lower the lamps and whisper gentle words, reminding them that the night was not to be feared, but to be respected. Many children grew up believing that good rest was a blessing, that sleep itself was a mercy, a time when the body and heart could renew, by permission of the Creator who gives rest to all. Beyond the home, in factories and cities, workers finished long shifts under dim lamps. When they stepped outside, the night wrapped around them like a cloak. Some hurried, others walked slowly, finding quiet in the still air. The darkness, though intimidating, was also honest. It revealed nothing false, it simply was. And for many weary souls, that honesty was comforting. Writers and philosophers of the time began to wonder whether the fear of darkness was really fear of being alone with one's thoughts. In silence, the mind cannot hide. It remembers, it questions, it reflects. And in that reflection, perhaps, people found something sacred, a moment to remember how brief life is, and how every sunrise is a mercy granted, not guaranteed. As science progressed, the Victorians started to understand light and vision more deeply. They learned that the body needs darkness to rest well, that night is not an enemy but a necessity. The Almighty designed creation with balance, day and night, activity and rest. To reject one was to disturb the natural peace written into existence itself. When electricity finally arrived, everything changed. Cities glowed late into the night, shops stayed open longer, and people began to forget what true darkness felt like. Fear seemed to fade, but so did that ancient sense of rhythm. The Victorians had lived close to the night. They respected its silence, its honesty, its reminder that humans are small under the vast sky. Tonight, as you listen and drift towards sleep, think of that world for a moment. A single candle in the dark, a faint ticking clock, the sound of wind against old glass. Imagine that calm, that gentleness. You are safe, The night is not your enemy. It is simply another gift of time. A pause written for you to rest and remember that peace, too, is part of history. So, close your eyes. Let your breathing slow. The Victorians once feared the dark, but they also learned to live gently within it. And as you rest tonight, may your heart be reminded that calmness, silence, and stillness all come from the one who gives peace to the soul. Good night, and welcome to the quiet side of history. Before the age of electricity, the night arrived not with noise, but with silence. As the sun sank below the horizon, the world dimmed gradually, every shadow lengthening until it swallowed the streets and fields. The Victorians lived in that rhythm, accepting that darkness came early in winter and lingered long before morning. When the last light of dusk faded, lamps were lit one by one, small flames pushing back the edges of the night. Inside a modest home, a family might gather as daylight slipped away. Curtains were drawn to keep the chill outside, and the faint scent of oil or wax filled the air. The glow from a single lamp softened every object in the room, the table, the chair, the pages of a book. In that gentle half-light, the world felt smaller, but somehow warmer too. Gas lamps, for those who could afford them, brought a fragile sense of progress. They hissed quietly and flickered in rhythm, glowing with a pale halo. Yet even these lights had limits. They did not chase away the dark entirely. They merely carved small islands of brightness in a sea of shadow. Walking the streets after sundown was still a cautious act, a quiet journey through the dim spaces between lamps. For the poor, candles and oil were precious. Each drop of fuel mattered, and many families timed their evenings carefully to stretch every hour of light. Reading or sewing after dark was done sparingly, eyes straining against the gloom. The soft sound of a wick crackling became as familiar as a heartbeat, marking the steady passing of another day. Outdoors, the world changed completely. Once the final lamps were extinguished, only the moon and stars remained to guide the way. Horses slowed their pace, carriages moved carefully, and voices dropped to whispers. Even nature seemed to rest, save for the quiet rustle of leaves and the faint cry of an owl. To walk under that sky was to feel both small and connected, a reminder of how vast creation truly is. In towns and villages, the absence of light meant the presence of imagination. The mind filled in what the eyes could not see. A shifting shadow might be a tree, or perhaps just the wind playing tricks. The Victorians lived with this uncertainty daily. They respected it, learned from it, and in a quiet way feared it too, not because darkness was evil, but because it revealed how limited human sight truly was. Some found beauty in that limitation. Artists and poets wrote about the soft mystery of twilight, how the world seemed to blend into one calm tone before disappearing into night. For them, darkness was not merely emptiness, it was texture, a background upon which light could be appreciated. Without the night, the glow of a single lamp would mean nothing. For families gathered indoors, the night was a time to reflect and slow down. Children listened to stories, not of terror, but of endurance and patience. The firelight danced gently across the walls, making shadows move like living things. It was both soothing and humbling to know that the light was fragile, that it burned only as long as the Almighty willed it to. In wealthy homes, servants moved quietly through long corridors, trimming wicks, carrying lanterns from room to room. Even luxury did not erase the night, it only softened its edges. The great houses stood in silence once the guests had gone. every flickering lamp a small defiance against the immensity of the dark outside. And when, at last, the final candle was blown out, all became still. The night claimed the world again, not cruelly, but completely. In that stillness, the Victorians surrendered to rest, trusting that the same power that allowed the sun to rise each morning would bring them safely to another dawn. In the heart of London, where factories and shops stayed busy until late evening, the fall of darkness changed everything. The hum of machines slowed, the laughter of workers faded, and the smell of smoke settled over quiet streets. Without bright light, even the familiar seemed different. Buildings loomed taller, alleys stretched longer, and the sky above glowed faintly with the haze of countless chimneys. For the people of the city, night was a moment of surrender, a time to stop striving and allow the world to rest. In smaller towns, life moved by the cycle of the sun. Bakers rose before dawn, blacksmiths worked while daylight lasted, and families ate supper before night fully arrived. There was comfort in that natural rhythm. The Almighty had written balance into creation, day for work, night for rest, and the Victorians, without realizing it, lived within that divine design. Sometimes, when the moon was full, the night carried a softer charm. Silvery light spilled across rooftops and cobblestones, and travelers could see far enough to move safely. Neighbors might pause at doorsteps to talk in hushed tones, grateful for the borrowed light. The moon, like the sun, was not a source of power in itself, but a reflection of the light granted by the Creator, a quiet reminder that every brightness has a higher source. For many, darkness also meant safety within the home. Doors were locked, shutters closed, and fires banked low. Families gathered close, speaking softly or sitting in silence. The sound of the fire crackling became the soundtrack of peace. In these moments, people learned to appreciate the calm that only night could bring, a silence so deep that it seemed to wash away the noise of the day. Those who lived in villages near forests or open land often spoke of how the night felt alive. The rustle of trees, the distant bark of a dog, the slow movement of the wind through tall grass, all reminded them that life continued even when unseen. Fear faded when they realized that darkness, too, was part of nature's order, made by the same wisdom that created light. Writers and thinkers began to see the night as more than an obstacle. They described it as a mirror for reflection, a time to think about life's fragility and purpose. In their journals and poems, they wrote of gratitude for warmth, for shelter, and for another day safely completed. Darkness, when accepted rather than fought, taught humility. Still, not everyone found comfort easily. In the poorest districts, where candles were few and homes were crowded, night could feel long and cold. Yet even there, people adapted. They spoke quietly, shared warmth, and learned to make peace with the hours they could not control. Faith and patience became their light, stronger than any flame. In this world without electricity, every spark of brightness was sacred. To light a lamp was to change the atmosphere of a room. To share that light was to offer care and protection. The Victorians did not take light for granted. They saw it as a gift, a small piece of mercy that reminded them that even in darkness, they were not forgotten. And so each night, homes across the land slipped into stillness. Some prayed before bed, others simply breathed in the quiet, listening to the faint sounds of the world outside. Darkness covered everyone equally, the rich, the poor, the young, the old, binding them in the same gentle pause before morning came again. When the first light of dawn finally touched the windows, it did not just mark a new day. It marked survival, gratitude, and the unbroken promise that every night, no matter how deep, will always give way to the return of light, by the will of the most merciful who brings the sun back to life each morning. Darkness, for the Victorians, was not only something that came at night, it was a part of daily life itself. Every sunset carried both beauty and burden. The moment the sun began to fade, people adjusted their routines, knowing that the world would soon grow dim. Light was precious, and every flicker of it was managed carefully, as though time itself were measured by the length of a candle's flame. In the home, families worked together to prepare for nightfall. The last water was drawn, fires were tended, and wicks were trimmed. Children learned from a young age to respect the flame, to shield it from drafts, to never waste it, and to understand that it was both fragile and essential. In a way, it was a daily lesson in gratitude, a reminder that every blessing, no matter how small, comes only through the will of the Almighty. Out on the streets, the absence of light made ordinary things uncertain. Uneven stones could twist an ankle. A puddle could look like a pit. People learned to walk slowly, to listen more than they looked. Darkness demanded attention. It forced humility. One could not move through it carelessly. It taught patience in a world where everything else felt hurried and loud. For tradesmen and workers, the dark marked the end of labor. Shops closed earlier, and crafts were left unfinished until daylight returned. The rhythm of work and rest was clear and constant. They did not fight the limits of the day, they accepted them. To rest at night was not laziness, it was obedience to the natural order placed within creation. There was, however, another side to this. The night could also bring uncertainty and fear. In crowded cities, where narrow streets and alleys twisted like mazes, darkness hid more than silence. People spoke of thieves and pickpockets who moved unseen. Yet even in this, the lesson was clear. Safety was not in the light itself, but in trust, awareness, and the protection that only the protector can give. In rural villages, fear took a quieter form. There were no loud streets or city dangers, only vast open spaces and the sounds of nature. The creak of a barn door or the distant call of an animal could startle those awake late into the night. But after a moment, calm returned. The night was not hostile, it was simply alive, filled with creatures following their own purpose within the Creator's design. For the Victorians, the boundary between day and night was not just physical, but emotional. Daytime was for work, movement, and conversation. Nighttime was for stillness, for thought, and for reflection. That contrast shaped their understanding of rest. That silence had its own purpose, just as necessary as labor. The darkness of evening brought families together. As lamps dimmed, people spoke more softly, their words carrying meaning in the quiet. Many found comfort in these hours, reading by firelight, mending clothes, or simply sitting close to one another. Even without noise, there was connection. It was a shared peace that light often disrupted. In this slower world, the night shaped character. It taught awareness, gratitude, and caution, not through fear, but through necessity. People understood how fragile light was, and in that understanding, they respected it more deeply. To them, darkness was not the enemy of life, but a reminder of balance, and in that balance, they found rhythm. Every sunrise began a cycle of effort, every sunset a return to humility. The Victorians lived with that pattern daily, not chasing brightness endlessly, but resting in the assurance that both light and dark were parts of the same divine order, each serving its own gentle purpose. As evening deepened, the quiet became part of the landscape itself. The sounds of footsteps softened, carriages rolled more slowly, and the hum of daily life dissolved into stillness. Even in the largest cities, there was a moment each night when it seemed the whole world paused to breathe. The Victorians, though surrounded by progress and invention, still bowed to the natural limits of light. When night came fully, every home became its own small world. Curtains were drawn tightly, not only to keep out cold air, but to create a sense of safety. Inside, the soft glow of a lamp painted gentle shapes across the walls. A mother might hum quietly while folding clothes. A father might read a line or two from a worn book. The flickering light made their faces look thoughtful, calm, and tired, the very image of ordinary peace. In many ways, darkness strengthened the family bond. Without constant distractions, people looked to one another for company. A simple conversation by firelight could last for hours. The rhythm of speech matched the rhythm of the flame, slow, warm, and unhurried. When the world outside was invisible, the world inside became more vivid. Children often learned small tasks before bed, gathering ashes from the hearth, trimming candle wicks, or fetching water from a nearby jug. These acts may seem ordinary, but they taught discipline and respect for resources. To waste light or warmth was a form of carelessness no one could afford. Every glow, every ember was a trust, a blessing provided by the sustainer of all things. As midnight neared, the sounds of the city changed again. Watchmen patrolled the streets, their lanterns swaying as they walked. They called the hour aloud to mark time, their voices echoing through sleeping neighborhoods. For those awake, those words were reassuring proof that someone else kept watch while others rested. It was a quiet act of service, one that reflected responsibility more than fear. The few who worked through the night, bakers, nurses, or guards, understood darkness differently. For them, it was not frightening but familiar. They learned its patterns, its silences, its moods. They knew how the air felt just before dawn, and how the faintest light of morning slowly painted the sky. To witness that change was to witness mercy, the steady renewal of creation. Darkness also had a way of humbling the proud. Wealth could buy more candles or better lamps, but no one could command the night to end sooner. The sun and moon followed their appointed times, and humans, regardless of status, could only wait. It reminded them that control belongs to none but the Almighty, who governs light and shadow alike. In rural parishes, church bells sometimes marked the hours through the dark, not as calls for prayer, but as reminders that time was still moving, even unseen. The gentle tolling reached across fields and hills, comforting those awake late into the night. Each sound was a soft rhythm of life continuing in peace. As the darkest hours passed, sleep became both rest and renewal. Those who closed their eyes trusted that the same power that brought light to the morning would protect them through the night. For the Victorians, this trust was practical as much as spiritual, an acceptance that safety came not from endless watching, but from surrendering to rest. And when dawn finally began to glow faintly through the curtains, people stirred to begin again. The cycle repeated: work, light, effort, and then, once more, the gentle return of darkness. It was not fear that shaped their nights, but understanding that light and shadow, motion and stillness, all had purpose under the same vast order created by the Most Merciful. In the heart of Victorian cities, darkness took on a different kind of meaning. When night fell, the wide streets of London, Manchester, or Birmingham transformed. Gas lamps lined the roads, but their light was faint and uneven. Between each pool of yellow glow lay long stretches of shadow, quiet, uncertain, and heavy with mystery. For those who lived among them, the night was both a companion and a warning. The growing cities of the 19th century were alive with industry by day. Steam engines hissed, markets bustled, and factories poured smoke into the sky. But when the last whistle blew and workers returned home, silence took their place. The air cooled, and the shadows of tall buildings seemed to grow even taller. Night in the city was not peaceful countryside silence. It was human silence, filled with the echoes of 1,000 lives settling into rest. For the poor, the darkened streets often brought unease. Many homes had no lamps at all, and alleys remained pitch black. In those hours, people moved quickly and spoke little. Crime was a real threat, not the imagined danger of stories, but the practical fear of losing one's belongings, or worse, one's safety. The absence of light made justice slow and protection scarce. Still, not all shadows hid harm. In many neighborhoods, small gestures of care appeared even in the dark. A lantern placed outside a door could guide travelers. A candle burning in a window signaled welcome. These simple acts were reminders that kindness could exist quietly, that in a world of uncertainty, light could be shared, not just possessed. Wealthier districts, meanwhile, glowed brighter. Gas lamps burned through the evening, and coachmen guided their passengers along grand boulevards. The contrast between rich and poor was visible even in the night. For the privileged, darkness was something decorative, a backdrop to elegant light. For the laboring classes, it was a condition of life itself. Newspapers of the time wrote often about the dangers of the dark. They warned readers to be cautious, to carry lamps or travel in pairs. Some articles described the city after sunset as a place of temptation and wrongdoing, using moral language rather than simply practical advice. To many Victorians, the night was not just a physical challenge, it was a test of character. The law, too, changed with the night. Police patrols moved through the streets with small lanterns, their soft circles of light marking safety wherever they passed. Their presence brought a sense of order, but it was fragile. No amount of human vigilance could hold back the vastness of the night completely. It was a quiet reminder that control has limits, and that true safety rests only in the protection of the Almighty. For some, the darkness of the city was strangely beautiful. Artists painted it, poets wrote of it, the way lamps shimmered in rain puddles, the way fog turned every light into a halo. There was melancholy in it, but also calm. The night made the city humble, stripping away its noise and revealing a slower heartbeat underneath the surface. Children growing up in those streets learned the patterns of light instinctively. They knew which alleys to avoid, which steps creaked, which corners hid cats or sleeping dogs. They played by lamplight when they could, inventing games from shadow and reflection. Even in hardship, imagination softened fear, and when midnight approached, the city seemed to exhale. The last carriages rolled away, lamps dimmed one by one, and the hum of humanity faded into the rhythm of wind and distant footsteps. The city, once loud and restless, gave itself over to the quiet, a stillness that felt ancient, as though every sound had been absorbed by the stone walls themselves. In those quiet hours, the night carried sounds that few noticed by day. The drip of rain from a rooftop, the creak of wooden shutters, the faint echo of hooves on distant cobblestones, all became louder in the emptiness. The city that once shouted with life now whispered softly, its noise replaced by rhythm and breath. In that stillness, some found peace, others found unease. Darkness did not change the city, it revealed its heartbeat. Many Victorians believed that darkness tested honesty. When the world could not see you, who were you really? It was a quiet question that every person faced in their own way. Some used the hours of night to think, to reflect on their choices, and to seek forgiveness for mistakes. They learned that character was shaped not under bright light, but in unseen moments, when one's heart stood bare before the all-seeing. Writers captured this side of the city in poems and diaries. They described narrow streets, where lamplight trembled like a living thing, and courtyards, where even silence felt full of memory. Their words carried no superstition, only observation. To them, the dark was a teacher, a quiet reminder of how fragile and beautiful life could be when stripped of noise and distraction. In factories that ran through the night, dim lamps flickered against brick walls. The workers who stayed late moved carefully, their hands steady though their bodies were weary. For them, the darkness was not frightening, it was familiar, part of their labor, part of their endurance. They worked not to chase the light, but to survive within the rhythm given to them. As technology grew, so did curiosity. Scientists and engineers began experimenting with stronger gas lamps, eager to extend daylight deeper into the night. Progress crept slowly, but each new invention promised security, order, and comfort. Yet some elders wondered if too much brightness would rob the night of its wisdom, its quiet lessons about patience and humility. Among the poorer citizens, the dark encouraged togetherness. Neighbors shared candles or coal, or simply sat outside by the faint glow of a street lamp. They spoke quietly about their days, offering small kindnesses that light could not illuminate. In that shared dimness, humanity felt equal, rich or poor. Everyone looked the same when shadows touched their faces. The city's faith was not in lamps or patrols, but in hope. Hope that the night would pass gently, that safety would hold, that morning would come again as promised. People locked their doors not from despair, but with trust, believing that every sunrise was another sign of mercy. Even those who wandered the streets late, deliverymen, guards, or travelers, carried with them a sense of reverence for the dark. They did not curse it, but respected it, knowing that their steps were guided not by light alone, but by the unseen protection of the Almighty who watches over all. And as the final hours before dawn arrived, a soft silver light began to return. The lamps seemed dimmer against it, their glow fading before the natural brilliance of morning. The city stirred again, doors opened, fires were lit, and the hum of daily life began to rise. The shadows of the night retreated quietly, as though bowing to the new day. In that brief transition, there was harmony, a reminder that darkness and light were never enemies, but partners in balance. The Victorians, though they feared the dark at times, also learned to live with it. The night was not an absence, but a pause, a necessary stillness, written by the same divine order that brings dawn after every dusk. To the Victorians, light was more than a simple glow in the dark, it was language. It spoke quietly of safety, of warmth, of human presence. In a time when night still ruled the hours after dusk, the smallest flame could hold great meaning. A candle in the window might tell a traveler that someone was awake and kind. A lamp by the door could promise welcome or warn that the house was still alive within. Inside homes, the way light moved shaped emotion. A flickering flame could make the room feel alive, while steady light from an oil lamp created peace. Families sat around these centers of brightness as if they were small suns, reading, stitching, or simply resting together. They did not need many words. The light itself carried comfort, a soft assurance that they were safe under the watch of the Almighty, who allows light to exist even in darkness. The Victorians were deeply aware of how fragile light could be. One careless movement, one gust of air, and the room would vanish into shadow. Because of this, tending to a lamp became a small act of devotion, trimming the wick, guarding the flame, making sure it lasted through the night. It was work done with patience and gratitude, a nightly ritual that mirrored life's own need for care. Writers and poets of the time often described light as a symbol of purity and understanding. They wrote not to worship it, but to admire what it revealed, how it made faces gentle and rooms familiar. They saw light as a way of seeing truth, both in the world and within the self. And in every reflection, there was the quiet reminder that light comes not from human invention, but by the will of the giver of light. Outside, light shaped how cities looked and felt. Street lamps lined the main roads, their weak glow painting paths for late travelers. The light shimmered on wet stone, turning puddles into small mirrors. From a distance, the city looked like a necklace of gold beads strung along the river, each flame trembling, each one fragile, yet together forming beauty. In rural homes, light followed simpler rhythms. When the sun set, families relied on the fire's glow. The hearth became the heart of the home, a place not only for warmth but for memory. Generations gathered by it, passing down stories as embers crackled softly. They believed, rightly, that warmth and comfort were blessings that came through creation's order, that every spark was permitted by the most merciful. To those living in the countryside, darkness was deep and complete. A single lantern hung by the door could be seen from far away, guiding those returning late. The faint light was like a thread connecting loved ones across distance, a wordless promise that someone waited, that someone cared. In wealthier houses, lamps became works of art. Glass chimneys etched with patterns scattered light across the walls, creating reflections that shimmered like gentle water. Even so, beauty never replaced meaning. The glow of a lamp was still a reminder of human need, of the balance between dependence and gratitude. Sometimes, the Victorians used light to mark important moments. A candle might be lit when a baby was born, when someone recovered from illness, or simply when peace filled a household after a hard day. In each of these, the act was not about the candle itself, but about giving thanks to the provider of mercy, who allows joy to return after hardship. In that way, the Victorians learned to read the language of light, to see not just its brightness, but its message. It spoke of patience, of care, and of humility. Light reminded them that comfort could vanish in an instant, and that safety, like flame, was sustained only by the one who sustains all things. As the evening hours passed, light became more precious. The flame of a candle burned lower, its wax pooling at the base like a slow hourglass. The shadows on the wall grew longer, stretching like silent witnesses to the passage of time. The Victorians knew this rhythm well, the steady fading of brightness marking the quiet approach of rest. When families finally prepared for sleep, the extinguishing of lamps carried meaning. Each small flame, carefully blown out, symbolized trust, the kind of trust that knows protection comes not from fire or wax, but from the protector himself. To release the light into darkness was a gentle act of surrender, a nightly reminder that rest, too, is a form of faith. Even in moments of fear, the presence of light brought calm. A sick child might sleep easier beneath the soft glow of a candle left burning nearby. Its light did not hold power in itself, but it reminded the weary heart that mercy and healing come from beyond what the eye can see. The glow comforted because it reflected hope, a hope that the night would pass gently into morning. In large cities, lamps along the streets flickered through fog and rain. The light blurred and spread, turning the air into a soft, golden haze. It gave the illusion of safety, though everyone knew how thin that safety truly was. Yet, even this fragile light carried beauty. It turned the city into something human, imperfect, trembling, but trying to stand against the vast dark that surrounded it. Poets of the age loved to write about such moments. The lonely lamp glowing in a quiet window, the single candle standing against midnight. Their words spoke not of fear, but of endurance. To them, the flame was like the soul, small, humble, and utterly dependent, yet capable of shining with quiet dignity when sustained by the Almighty's permission. For some, light became a way to express care for others. A mother might rise before dawn to light the fire, so her family would wake to warmth. A husband might keep a lamp burning until his wife returned from a visit. These gestures were not grand, but they carried tenderness, acts of love performed in the language of light. The Victorians also noticed how light shaped emotion. A single lamp could make a space feel safe, while sudden darkness could change everything. This awareness made them thoughtful about the world around them. They did not take brightness for granted, for they lived close enough to darkness to understand its lesson, that comfort is never guaranteed, and gratitude should never sleep. As night reached its quietest hour, the last lamp would finally be put out. The room would sink into soft shadow, the world outside already still. Only the faint glow of the dying hearth remained, a warm heart slowly dimming. It was not sad, only natural. The fire had done its work. Now it could rest, as every living soul must. For the Victorians, this nightly fading of light was not a loss, but a reminder of rhythm. Just as the sun must set to rise again, so too must brightness give way to shadow. Life moved in balance, a pattern written into creation itself, one that taught patience, humility, and trust in the one who governs both light and night. And so, as each home grew quiet and the city dimmed to black, the final language of light was silence. No words, no flickers, just peace. The lamps had spoken their message, that light, though small, carries meaning far beyond its glow. That every flame, like every soul, exists only through mercy, and that when darkness finally arrives, it is not the end, only another pause before dawn. When night fully settled, the world outside grew silent, and the home became a small island of calm. For the Victorians, this was a sacred time, not marked by prayer bells or ceremonies, but by stillness itself. The day's labor faded into memory, and the air filled with the soft sounds of domestic peace, the faint hiss of a candle, the whisper of fabric being folded, the low hum of quiet conversation. The home, once busy with footsteps and chores, now breathed slower. Children were tucked into bed, their small voices fading behind closed doors. In the main room, the glow from the hearth painted the walls in shades of gold and brown. Even the furniture seemed to rest. There was a deep sense of order, not of wealth or pride, but of gratitude, knowing that the Most Merciful had allowed them to see another night safely. For many families, these hours before sleep were the gentlest of the day. They spoke softly, as though not to disturb the calm. Mothers often mended clothes, their needles flashing briefly in the firelight. Fathers read quietly from books or letters. There was no rush, no noise, only time, simple, ordinary, and peaceful. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, black and endless, but inside, warmth held firm. It reminded the Victorians of the balance between the world's vastness and the home's safety. The darkness outside was not a threat, it was a boundary, a reminder of how much mercy exists within walls where love and care reside. The faint ticking of a clock became part of this quiet symphony. Its rhythm was steady, almost comforting, as though marking the passage of peace instead of hours. Each tick seemed to whisper that rest was near, that life was allowed to slow down. It was a sound that filled the silence without breaking it. Candles burned lower as the night deepened. Their flames wavered, then steadied, as if breathing along with the family's own quiet rhythm. Sometimes, when the wax melted low, the flame would flare up suddenly before fading again, a final shimmer before surrendering to rest. To the Victorians, even that moment felt symbolic, the reminder that all things, great and small, end in calm by the decree of the Creator. It was during these hours that reflection came naturally. Without the noise of daylight, thoughts grew clearer. People thought about their work, their families, and their choices. Some offered silent prayers of thanks, while others simply listened to the wind outside and felt small beneath the vastness of creation. In the calm, humility came easily. Evening routines were simple. The last dishes were washed, the fire was banked with ash, and lamps were turned down low. Some families kept one small flame burning through the night, not as a charm or superstition, but as a practical kindness for anyone who might wake before dawn. It was a gesture of care, done quietly and without need for words. For those who lived alone, the night was quieter still. The walls held the memory of the day, footsteps, laughter, and work, now replaced by the hush of solitude. Yet even in loneliness, there was comfort. The stillness became a companion, and the faint glow of a candle offered company enough. To sit beside that small light was to feel connected, not to crowds, but to the order of creation itself. And when the house finally fell into full silence, peace took hold completely. The air cooled, the fire dimmed, and the scent of wood and wax lingered faintly. There was no fear in this darkness, only acceptance. The Victorians understood that the night was not empty. It was full of rest, of quiet blessings unseen, written into the rhythm of life by the Almighty who never sleeps. In the smaller cottages scattered across the countryside, the rhythm of quiet nights was much the same. The fire burned low, its glow reflecting off rough wooden walls. The night outside felt endless, yet inside there was peace, a gentle pause in the long labor of living. For the farmers and their families, the calm after a day's work was a blessing more valuable than gold. It was a time to breathe, to rest, and to remember the source of all comfort. Some nights were marked by the sound of rain against the roof, steady and soothing. It was a familiar song, one that lulled children to sleep and kept the elders thoughtful by the fire. Each drop was a reminder of sustenance, of how the most merciful nourishes the earth, even in darkness. To hear rain at night was to be reminded that creation continues to serve its purpose while humanity sleeps. In wealthier homes, the stillness carried its own tone. Long halls echoed with the ticking of distant clocks, and the faint smell of candle smoke lingered after servants had left. The quiet was grand, but also humbling. No matter how vast the home, night reduced every person to the same truth, that rest and safety come not from wealth, but from the permission of the Protector. Books became companions in these silent hours. Many Victorians read before bed, turning each page slowly under dim light. The words often blurred as sleep approached, the mind drifting between thought and dream. The act of reading was not only education, but release, a way to end the day gently, to let the mind unwind while the heart prepared for peace. Those who kept diaries wrote softly before extinguishing their lamps. Their entries spoke of small things: the weather, a neighbor's visit, the success of a harvest, or the laughter of a child. These moments, ordinary as they seemed, became treasures of memory. They wrote not to seek attention, but to preserve gratitude, to remember that each day, even the dullest, was a mercy. Sometimes the night brought conversation that daylight never allowed. Parents spoke honestly to each other when the house grew still. The soft flicker of firelight seemed to make words kinder, thoughts slower, and tempers calm. It was in these quiet hours that many found reconciliation, forgiveness, and understanding, gifts that only peace could nurture. For those who lived in cities, the sense of quiet was different. The faint rumble of distant wheels or the echo of footsteps on wet streets replaced the chirping of crickets. Yet even among brick and smoke, people found small oases of calm: a lighted room, a shared meal, a few minutes of stillness before sleep. The night, in its own way, equalized all people. Children often fell asleep to the sound of their parents' voices, not in stories of ghosts or spirits, but in gentle lessons about kindness and patience. The dark outside did not frighten them as long as warmth surrounded them. The rhythm of breathing, the crackle of the hearth, and the knowledge that they were safe, these became the lullabies of Victorian childhood. In the final hours before dawn, when even the fire had turned to ash, the quiet reached its deepest point. A soft chill filled the air. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for morning. In that silence, many Victorians felt closest to peace. It was a time when worry slept, and the soul rested in the calm written by the Almighty. And when the first light crept gently through the curtains, it did not arrive with noise or haste. It came like mercy, slow, certain, and beautiful. The warmth of the sun replaced the flame of the candle, and another day began. The Victorians rose once more to their work, grateful for the quiet night behind them and the unspoken promise that after every day's labor, rest would always return. As calm as the Victorian night could be, it often carried a quiet unease. When the lamps were dimmed and the fire burned low, silence sometimes felt heavier than comfort allowed. Alone with their thoughts, many people discovered that darkness had a way of opening doors inside the mind, doors that daylight kept firmly closed. The Victorians lived in a time of reflection and restraint. Society encouraged order, discipline, and control. But in the still hours after sunset, when there was no more work to be done and no more words to speak, the mind wandered freely. The dark did not create fear, it revealed what had always been there, waiting to be heard. In that silence, worries grew louder. People thought about debts, about illnesses, about the loved ones they had lost. For some, the ticking clock at midnight was not a comfort, but a reminder that time moved forward. Even when hearts felt stuck in yesterday, the night had a way of teaching truth, gently but firmly, showing that nothing in life stays still forever. It was not superstition that made people uneasy, but awareness. In the absence of light, one could no longer distract oneself with work or conversation. The self became clearer, every mistake, every regret, every unspoken prayer. Yet this was also where growth began. For the Victorians who faced these quiet hours with humility, darkness became not a punishment, but an invitation to reflect. Writers of the time often called this sensation the weight of the night. They described it as a calm pressure that settled over the heart when all else went quiet. It wasn't despair, but something gentler, the kind of sadness that makes one think deeply, the kind that reminds the soul of its longing for peace. In homes across England, people learned to balance that quiet fear with faith. They knew that worry changes nothing, and that comfort is found not in control, but in trust. The Almighty, who governs both darkness and dawn, allows stillness so that hearts may remember where true calmness comes from. The Victorians, in their own reserved way, understood this truth more deeply than most. Some tried to keep the night busy by reading late or talking softly until sleep came. Others simply accepted the silence and listened to it. The creak of the house, the sigh of the wind, the heartbeat in their chest, all became part of one quiet lesson, that even when alone, a person is never truly abandoned. There were moments when fear came suddenly, without reason. The flicker of a candle might throw a shadow that startled the eyes, or a gust of wind might shake the windows unexpectedly. But once the mind settled, calm returned. The Victorians learned that fear passes like a cloud, and that the heart, when steady in faith, can outlast any shadow. The night often brought memories too of childhood, of lost friends, of words left unsaid. The Victorians did not rush to push these thoughts away. Instead, they allowed them to drift by like quiet visitors, reflections that came not to harm, but to remind. They understood that remembering is part of healing, and that patience is stronger than any fear. So even in their unease, they found meaning. The dark was not simply something to survive, it was something to learn from. It taught them that the mind, like the body, needs rest, that peace is not found by fighting fear, but by understanding it. The silence of the night was not empty at all. It was full of lessons, softly written by the most wise. As the night deepened, thoughts often wandered toward the unseen. The Victorians, living between faith and the early stirrings of science, were curious about what lay beyond human understanding. Yet in their most honest moments, they admitted that not every question needed an answer. The quiet of night taught humility, that wisdom begins not with knowing everything, but with accepting that only the all-knowing holds the truth of all things. In these long hours, the smallest sounds could stir great emotion. A door creaking, a branch brushing the window, or even the sudden silence when a fire went out, each moment reminded them of how fragile the senses were. When vision failed, hearing grew sharper, and the mind filled in the spaces that sight could not reach. This sharpened awareness was both unsettling and beautiful, a reminder that human perception is limited by design. For those who struggled with sleeplessness, the dark could feel endless. Time stretched, minutes felt like hours. Yet even this trial had meaning. The sleepless learned patience, to wait through discomfort, to trust that dawn would come in its appointed time. They realized that peace is not the absence of difficulty, but the strength to remain calm within it. Many Victorians found comfort in quiet prayers whispered into the night. These were not loud or dramatic, but soft, almost like breathing. They spoke of gratitude for safety, for warmth, for the gift of another day. Even in fear, the act of remembering the most merciful brought steadiness. Their hearts slowed, and the weight of the night grew lighter. Some wrote about how the darkness made them feel small beneath creation. The stars above the city, faint but steady, reminded them of divine order. Each point of light hung exactly where it was meant to be, never lost, never out of place. To look upward was to remember that nothing in this world moves without purpose, that every heart is known even in silence. Others used the stillness to reflect on their behavior. Had they spoken kindly that day? Had they shown patience to others? Night became a mirror of the soul. The Victorians understood, in their own quiet way, that real peace begins within, not in the brightness of a room, but in the purity of conscience. For those who feared the night itself, reassurance often came through small, familiar things. The gentle rhythm of a loved one's breathing, the warmth of a blanket, the scent of the hearth, each was a sign of mercy. It reminded them that comfort was always near, that fear had boundaries, and that light would always return. Writers of the time noted that the greatest fears were not of darkness, but of loneliness and guilt. Yet they also believed that reflection could heal both. To sit in silence and face one's thoughts was an act of courage, one that led to understanding and forgiveness. The night became a teacher, gentle but persistent, and so, as the hours passed, the fear within softened. What began as unease transformed into stillness. What felt like isolation revealed itself as opportunity, the space to listen, to breathe, to trust. The dark, once intimidating, became familiar. The Victorians did not defeat their fear. They befriended it, learning from it night after night. By the time the first light of morning began to brush the horizon, the heart had quieted. The fear of the night had served its purpose, not to torment, but to teach. It showed that peace is not found in brightness, but in trust. For even in the deepest dark, the light-giver never ceases to watch over creation, guiding every soul gently toward dawn. As the 19th century moved forward, knowledge began to challenge fear. The Victorians, long accustomed to living within the quiet mystery of darkness, started to seek understanding through study and observation. Science became a new language, one that tried to explain what had once only been felt. Yet, even as their knowledge grew, the night still held its quiet power, reminding them that discovery does not replace wonder. Astronomers were among the first to change how people viewed the dark. They set up telescopes in gardens and on rooftops, gazing upward into the vast sky. The stars, once seen only as decoration, became objects of careful study. They mapped constellations, tracked planets, and recorded eclipses with growing precision. Still, even these men of science often paused to reflect on the majesty above them, the perfect order in which everything moved, sustained by the will of the Almighty. Physicians and scholars also began to explore the effects of night on the human body. They observed how people slept, how dreams came and went, and how rest restored strength. What had once been thought of as weakness or idleness was now understood as part of the natural design. Sleep was no longer a mystery, it was mercy, written into creation so that hearts and minds might renew. As knowledge expanded, the Victorians began to see that fear itself had roots in misunderstanding. The shadows that once seemed alive were nothing more than tricks of the eye. The sounds that startled the heart were the movements of wind, wood, and life outside. Science did not remove fear entirely, but it helped the people see the world as part of a grand, deliberate balance, where everything had its place, even the dark. Light itself became an object of study. Scientists experimented with gases, mirrors, and lenses to understand how light traveled and why it behaved as it did. They learned that light could be bent, split, and measured, and that its presence was not random but purposeful. Many found deep meaning in this discovery, for it reflected the truth that all creation, even the unseen, operates by divine command. Inventors, inspired by curiosity, began to imagine a future where the night could be illuminated more completely. They tested brighter lamps, refined glass, and searched for fuels that burned longer and cleaner. These quiet experiments were the beginning of a transformation, one that would eventually change how humanity related to the dark. Yet, in those early days, it was still a careful dance between progress and patience. While the cities embraced innovation, the countryside held to its old rhythm. Farmers continued to trust the moonlight and the stars, which guided them just as they always had. To them, science was not a replacement for faith. It was another way of witnessing the perfection of creation. The night sky remained their calendar, their clock, and their quiet reminder that the world was vast but never without order. Children, hearing stories of these discoveries, began to see the night differently. It became less of a mystery and more of a field of exploration. They imagined traveling to the stars, studying the moon, and building new kinds of lamps. Their dreams, though built on knowledge, were still filled with awe. The wonder remained, only now joined by understanding. Writers reflected this change too. No longer did they speak of the dark as a threat. Instead, they wrote of it as a companion to thought, the canvas upon which truth and creativity were drawn. In quiet homes and city studies alike, the night became a time not of fear, but of reflection and learning. The flickering lamp no longer guarded against darkness. It invited the mind to explore within it. The Victorians had not conquered the dark. They had begun to understand it. They learned that knowledge, when guided by humility, brings calm. That science and faith, when held together, reveal not opposition but harmony. And in that harmony they found a peace that no invention alone could ever create. The peace of knowing that every light, every shadow, and every breath moves under the same divine law. As the thirst for understanding grew, scientists and inventors began to see the night not as an obstacle, but as a frontier. It was a realm that called for discovery, a space waiting to be explained. Laboratories glowed faintly after dusk, their lamps burning late as minds worked to uncover the hidden patterns of nature. In that pursuit, the Victorians found a new form of courage, one that came not from defying the dark, but from studying it patiently. Observatories expanded across the empire. From small towers in English gardens to large domes built on quiet hills, telescopes pointed upward toward creation's endless expanse. Each new star mapped was a reminder of how vast the universe truly was, and how small human life seemed beneath it. Yet this humility did not bring despair, it brought clarity. The night sky reminded every observer that order, precision, and beauty flow from divine will, not from human invention. In homes and schools, children began learning about light and shadow in ways their grandparents never had. They were taught how the earth turned, how the moon reflected sunlight, and how seasons shifted with cosmic rhythm. What once felt mysterious now became a lesson in balance. It was not the absence of faith that science taught, but an invitation to look closer to witness the signs of the Creator written in every part of nature. Inventors like Michael Faraday and Joseph Swan experimented tirelessly, seeking a light that could shine without flame. Their work laid the foundation for electric illumination, though few at the time could imagine what such an invention would mean. The quiet glow of a filament would one day change how the world lived, worked, and slept. But in these early years, it was only an idea, fragile, like the flame of a single candle in the mind of a dreamer. While cities celebrated progress, some Victorians felt a quiet nostalgia. They wondered if the new lights might steal away the stars. There was beauty in the natural darkness, they said, a peace that artificial brightness could never replace. The debate between progress and simplicity echoed in books, in sermons, and in homes. Yet most agreed that light, however it arrived, was a gift only possible through divine wisdom guiding human hands. Doctors studying the effects of sleep also found new truths. They learned that the body's rhythm followed the cycle of light and darkness, that the mind needed both stimulation and silence. In these findings, the Victorians rediscovered something ancient, that creation itself is built upon balance, and that rest is as sacred as labor. The night, once feared, revealed itself as a necessary mercy. Philosophers began to write about the moral night, not as a thing to escape, but to understand. They saw darkness as symbolic, the quiet space where reflection happens, where truth can grow without distraction. It was in silence, they said, that wisdom takes root. And so, the same shadows that once frightened them became teachers, offering lessons in patience and humility. In universities, candlelit halls glowed with discussion late into the night. Young scholars debated the nature of light, time, and faith. Some argued that science and belief were opposites, while others, more mature in their reflection, saw them as partners. The most thoughtful among them knew that knowledge without gratitude was hollow, that every discovery pointed back to the source of all understanding. Even in ordinary homes, the spirit of curiosity reached the dinner table. Fathers spoke of new inventions, mothers wondered at the speed of progress, and children dreamed of cities that would never sleep. The world was changing, and though the Victorians embraced it cautiously, they did so with reverence, acknowledging that knowledge was only as pure as the heart that sought it. By the end of the century, the fear of the dark had softened into respect. Science had not destroyed the mystery of the night, it had deepened it. For even as the world grew brighter, people understood that some truths could never be measured: the peace of stillness, the beauty of reflection, and the quiet certainty that the Almighty governs both light and shadow with perfect wisdom. The coming of electric light marked a quiet revolution. What had once been the natural rhythm of human life, work by day, rest by night, began to shift. For the first time, people could push back the darkness, not with flame, but with something steady and clean. It was a marvel unlike anything the Victorians had ever seen. The dark, which had shaped their habits for centuries, began to lose its old authority. The first demonstrations drew crowds in wonder. When a bulb flickered to life, people gasped as though witnessing magic. Yet there was no enchantment in it, only knowledge, effort, and the permission of the Creator who allows human hands to find what He has placed within His creation. The light shone not to defy the night, but to show what was always possible when curiosity met divine mercy. At first, electric light was rare and expensive. Only wealthy homes and important public buildings could afford it. The streets of London glowed faintly with new lamps, their brilliance cutting through the fog like silver threads. People paused to stare, marveling at how steady the light was. No smoke, no flame, no hiss of gas. Just a soft, unwavering glow that seemed almost alive. For the poor, change came slowly. In small houses and crowded rooms, candles and oil lamps remained their only light. But even there, hope grew. Word spread of a time when every home might be lit without soot or danger. Newspapers called it the dawn of endless day. It was a poetic way of saying that humanity had found a tool to reshape the rhythm of life. As more buildings were fitted with electric wires, the world after sunset began to change. Shops stayed open later. Workers could see clearly into the evening hours. Children studied longer, their books no longer shadowed by fading candlelight. It felt as if a new chapter had begun, one filled with brightness, comfort, and possibility. Yet, with that brightness, came reflection. Some Victorians wondered whether too much light might take away the peace that darkness offered. They missed the flicker of the flame, the hush that came when the lamps went out, the natural signal that the day was done. Progress, they realized, often came with quiet costs, the loss of simplicity, the fading of stillness. Inventors continued to improve the design of electric lamps, making them safer and brighter. Factories began to hum through the night, their machines working under a glow that never faded. The boundaries between day and night grew thinner. For the first time, the world could remain awake if it chose to. Humanity had learned to borrow light, but not without consequence. In the cities, nighttime no longer felt mysterious. The once dark streets now gleamed with white light. Faces were visible even after midnight. Crime decreased in some areas, but in others, new troubles arose. The shadows had not vanished, they had simply changed their shape. The dark no longer hid the body, but it still tested the heart. Artists captured the transformation in paint and poetry. They spoke of how the electric glow seemed colder than firelight, precise, powerful, but missing warmth. They missed the trembling dance of the flame, the imperfect beauty that had once filled the night. The world was brighter, yes, but also quieter in a different way, less intimate, more mechanical. And yet, amid all this change, some saw deeper meaning. They said that every discovery reflected the same eternal pattern, that light, whether from the sun or a small bulb, exists only by divine will. It reminded them that human creation is never separate from divine creation. The Victorians had not invented light. They had only uncovered another path to what the light giver had always allowed to shine. As electricity spread, the rhythm of human life changed forever. Streets that had once fallen silent after dusk now stayed awake with noise and movement. Cafes stayed open later, music played longer, and factories glowed deep into the night. The world, for the first time, seemed unwilling to sleep. For many Victorians, this was both astonishing and unsettling, a sign that humanity was stepping into a new age, one filled with light, but also with restlessness. Those who had grown up before the electric age often spoke of missing the natural end of the day. Before, darkness had been a teacher. It told people when to stop, when to reflect, when to rest. Now, that teacher was fading. Light no longer carried meaning. It simply existed, constant and unending. Some worried that by losing the dark, society might also lose the calm that came with it. Writers began to question what this new world would mean for the soul. Would people forget the value of stillness? Would the night lose its sacred quiet? They wrote essays and poems mourning the passing of the candle flame, that fragile symbol of human dependence and humility. Electric light, they said, was powerful, but it lacked the softness of mercy. At the same time, others rejoiced. The glow of the new lamps represented progress, safety, and hope. Streets once too dangerous to walk at night now invited conversation and community. Children no longer feared the dark corners of their homes. Light was no longer a rare treasure, but an everyday comfort. Humanity, they said, had finally conquered the shadows, but even those who celebrated could not deny a subtle change in the air. With endless brightness came endless work. The factories that once rested at night began running round the clock. Sleep became shorter, rest became rarer. The boundary between effort and recovery blurred. The world was brighter, but hearts grew more tired. The lesson of night, that everything needs pause, was slowly forgotten. In some homes, candles still burned beside electric lamps, not out of necessity, but for memory. The gentle flicker reminded people of what light used to mean, not power, but presence. The flame seemed almost alive, breathing with the rhythm of the room. Against the steady glow of electricity, it stood as a small, humble reminder that even progress must be tempered by gratitude. Religious thinkers of the time wrote about this change with wisdom. They reminded readers that true illumination does not come from wires or filaments, but from faith, patience, and understanding. Light without guidance, they said, is like day without purpose, bright but empty. And so they urged people to see the electric glow not as victory over darkness, but as another gift within divine creation, one that must be used with care. As the century turned, cities glittered with brightness. From above, they looked like constellations fallen to earth, webs of light spreading across the land. Travelers, arriving by train at night, described the sight as breathtaking, but strangely quiet. The wonder was there, yet it was different from the wonder of stars. Human-made light had filled the world, but not the heavens. For some, the transformation was complete. The night no longer frightened them. They had built a world where darkness could not reach, or so they believed. But even then, shadows still existed, not outside, but within. Fear, they realized, does not vanish with brightness, it only moves inward. The human heart still needed reflection, humility, and faith to find peace. And so, as the electric age began, the Victorians entered a new chapter of their history, one filled with brilliance and change. Yet beneath the hum of wires and the glow of endless lamps, a quiet truth remained. No matter how bright the world becomes, light and shadow will always belong together, each serving its purpose under the perfect balance written by the light giver himself. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Victorians stood between two worlds, one shaped by the rhythm of sun and shadow, and another built by the hum of electricity. They had learned to live without fear of the dark, yet in doing so, they also began to forget what it meant to rest within it. The quiet lessons of night, patience, humility, reflection, slowly faded behind the glow of unbroken light, but history remembers them not only for their inventions, but for their transition. They were a generation that carried both candle and wire, that stood in the soft light of the past and reached toward a brighter future. In their story, we see ourselves, still seeking comfort, still longing for understanding, still learning that peace does not come from brightness, but from balance. For all their progress, the Victorians never fully escaped the pull of the night. Even with electric lamps burning, many still paused before sleep, listening to the hush that filled their homes. In that stillness, they found the same comfort their ancestors had known for centuries, the peace that comes when the world quiets, and the heart remembers its place beneath the vastness of creation. The night, they realized, had never been their enemy. It had been their teacher. It showed them their limits, their smallness, their need for rest. And though they had learned to light every corner of the earth, no invention could ever replace the stillness written by the most merciful, who created night not for fear, but for peace. In this quiet understanding, the story of the Victorian night finds its calm conclusion. Fear gave way to knowledge, and knowledge to reflection. The shadows they once dreaded became reminders of how deeply the world depends on contrast, on light and dark, motion and rest, sound and silence. As we look back on their journey, perhaps we can also take a lesson for ourselves. In a world that never sleeps, there is beauty in slowing down, there is meaning in quiet, and there is mercy in every moment when we allow ourselves to rest, trusting that the same hand that brings the morning will also guard the night. So tonight, as you lie in your own quiet space, let your thoughts soften like theirs once did. The day is done. The light has served its purpose. It is time to let the stillness return. The night around you is not empty. It is full of unseen calm, written for your heart to rest. If you've enjoyed this quiet journey through history, I invite you to subscribe and return next time. Together, we'll continue wandering through the quiet corners of time, where stories rest softly and history whispers itself to sleep. And in our next story, we'll travel back even further, to a time before electricity, before engines, when towns grew stone by stone, without modern tools. Our next journey will be how did medieval towns grow without modern technology? A peaceful exploration of the patience, skill, and quiet strength that built the early cities of our world. Thank you for listening, for sharing this calm space, and for allowing history to rest with you tonight. May your sleep be easy, your dreams gentle, and your heart at peace beneath the mercy of the light giver. Until next time, good night.